The youth of Mexico, the Gen Z, primarily it seems, is having enough. They've had enough of this narco-controlled government, meaning a government that is under the control of the cartels. And make no mistake, my friends, that is precisely what has happened to that country. And the young people have had enough. The protests are headed towards the president's capital. There have been attempts to break in. And you know, this is something that I believe is necessary if there's any chance for Mexico to recover. I hate to say it, because this often ends with nothing positive when you have governments overthrown. But Mexico is entirely compromised. The government is a narco-state. It is controlled by the cartels. That is what's happening here. And the young people, I think, realize the danger when they want to do something about it. It is a terrifying, terrifying situation to be in if you are a Mexican citizen. See, the Mexican government was complicit with the rise of the cartel. They benefited from the cartel in those early days. Lots of money coming in with the damaging of people with drugs and other nefarious activities from the cartel back in the 80s. When the United States declared war against drugs, the whole "you just say no to drugs" and all that, the Mexican government was allowing the operation to continue without anything stopping it. They didn't care. They stood by, the Mexican government stood by while the cartel grew and grew and grew until it was so great that eventually they realized, hey, why don't we just have our own parallel state? Why don't we eventually take over? And so by the time Mexico saw the danger and declared war against the cartels, it was just far too late. I mean, today you have entire regions of the country paying cartel taxes, not federal taxes. Their 20-year war against the cartels is so badly lost that the previous Mexican president capitulated the cartel completely, ending the war against the cartel, beginning his campaign of hugs, not bullets, meaning the Mexican government no longer tried to stop the cartel and instead decided to focus on helping the poor, which of course was just allowing the cartels to rule with no longer a government threat. And that's because the Mexican government was so compromised that the military was comprised in many cases of cartel people. And the current president of Mexico, Sheinbaum, was mentored by this lunatic with his hugs not bullets program. So, in my opinion, the state of Mexico is nothing more than a puppet for the cartel now. And Sheinbaum is a useful, stooly idiot who works for the cartel. And if nothing is done, by the way, this criminal organization, eventually it will pose a huge threat to the United States, much greater than it is today if they're left alone for too long. So either the people of Mexico take their own country back, or eventually I think the U.S. will have to go in there and curb stomp Mexico to obliterate the threat. And that would be terrible. But I think eventually that's going to have to happen. So this is from the UK Daily Mail. Mexico anti-corruption protest descends into chaos as thousands of Gen Z demonstrators storm the National Palace. And again, this is something that needs to happen. There needs to be some kind of taking back the country away from the cartel. And if the Mexican government will not do anything about it, and I don't know that they can, because any politician who stands up against the cartels are assassinated or killed. I mean, what else can you do? I think they're fighting a losing battle, of course, but, you know, good luck, right? Rioters, according to the UK Daily Mail, stormed the barricades outside the presidential palace in Mexico City as an anti-cartel protest descended into chaos. Mobs of frustrated, mostly Gen Z Mexican protesters who, I'm adding this part, realize that their future is doomed if they don't do something about it, is now trading blows with cops and screaming slogans about how corruption and cartels killings have spiraled out of control in their country. That is the understatement of the century, by the way. Thousands of people filled the streets of the nation's capital and marched to the palace, which is the official residence of President Claudia Sheinbaum, the stooly, progressive politician who took office last October. The demonstrations, largely organized by young activists and supported by older supporters of opposition movements, was the culmination of citizens' frustration with the government's inability to stop violence and provide economic opportunity because they are fully controlled by the cartel. Ding, ding, ding. Spoiler alert. Protesters, many of whom are calling for Sheinbaum's resignation, were seen trying to breach police barricades around the palace. Authorities responded by shooting tear gas out into the crowd, causing people to run in all different directions. Clashes between citizens and police lasted for hours, but eventually order was returned to the area around the palace. Pablo Vasquez, Mexico City's chief of police, said 20 people were arrested and were set to be charged with battery, assault, and robbery. Vasquez, or whatever, added that 60 of his officers were injured, 40 of whom had to be sent to the hospital for treatment. It's getting bad in Mexico. Outrage over the November 1st assassination of Carlos Manzo, the mayor of a crime-ridden town in western Mexico, was on the mind of most people who joined the protest. Many could be seen wearing straw hats that symbolize his political movement, which is vigorously focused on having a zero-tolerance policy for organized crime, which, again, the federal government for Mexico is no longer for. They have lost. A 65-year-old real estate agent said that the state is dying. He was killed, referring to that mayor, because he was a man who was sending officers into the mountains to fight delinquents, meaning the cartels. He had the guts to confront them. Saturday was the biggest protest against Sheinbaum to date. She has responded to demonstrations throughout the week by accusing the right-wing groups of being behind the escalating shows of discontent. Well, they don't want to be ruled by an evil cartel, so, I guess if that's what it takes, right? The protests against Sheinbaum and her Morena party, which Manzo splintered off from back in 2024, resembled other Gen Z-led movements like the ones in Nepal and Madagascar, countries where the governments were toppled. And make no mistake, even if the government's toppled, that doesn't mean that better things are on the horizon. Things could always get worse, but they also could certainly get better if you get lucky. Depends on what happens with the power vacuum. Now, Sheinbaum, they write, still enjoys a high approval rating, but there is a sizable portion of the electorate that is beginning to feel like she's more of the same. And keep in mind, with the kind of corruption that Mexico has, this high rating could also be fake. I mean, Adolf Hitler had 90% approval rating throughout the vast majority of his reign. I don't know. I think anything is possible. Now, Giovanna Agundez, a 32-year-old woman who was at the protest, told Bloomberg that this is exactly what happened with previous governments. Don't they always claim to be different? Doesn't Sheinbaum keep saying that all women, not only her, achieved power? Right now, I feel powerless. What a dumb thing to say. All women have achieved power because I have power. Sheinbaum was not at the National Palace at the time of the protest, and instead she was nearly 600 miles away in Campeche, a state in southeast Mexico. She said, "Thank you for your love, beautiful people of Palizada. When there's a government at the people's service, there's nothing that can stop our nation," she wrote on X, alongside pictures of her hugging supporters. Sheinbaum has since condemned the violence at the Capitol. So the bottom line is, the battle to save the country is well underway in Mexico. I don't know if it's too late because, let's say that you topple the government. Well, the cartel is still there, and they're still going to do everything in their power to maintain power. The people of Mexico waited too long to do something about it. The U.S. had a very similar problem with our mafia, where they nearly reached the same levels of power. And had they been left alone for just a few more decades, I think they would have achieved it. They had so many people in political power under their protection, under their influence, that it was just a matter of time. So, we dealt with it soon enough. They're still here, but they're a shadow of their former glory, if you will. And Mexico? Well, Mexico lost. So there's a long way to go for that nation to recover from this. if they can. And I don't hold high hopes for them, if I'm being completely honest. But, you know, I guess anything's better than living under the current regime. So who knows? I guess we'll find out.